So we have a few minutes. If I could invite our industry speakers back to the dais. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but you are very valuable resource, and we want to make the most of you. I will give up my seat, and you guys come, and we'll have a bit of Q&A with the audience, if we may. And if there's the speakers from the morning session are still around, so we do have some roving mics. So if anyone wanted to chip in at any point, we'll have about 10 minutes just to give Lisa, who's just arrived. We'll just give you a few minutes to compose yourself, and let's make a start, guys. Please do come down. So this morning we've had a really, I think, really interesting and dynamic session. We've heard a lot about ethics and regulation and definitions, which is always nice. We've got, this is like the captains of industry staring back at me. This is great. And I'm sure we've generated a lot of questions from the audience. So please, if you do have any questions, then please do chip in. Now's the time. John, yeah. Ah, there's two. We'll let you slug it out for who goes first. Prof, why don't you?
So very interesting talks. I just wonder how industry views this, because once the AI systems are incorporated into general clinical practice, potentially you're going to have medical records saying, the AI said this was an adenoma, and we could throw it away. But actually, it turns out to be a cancer, and that's then a permanent record in the patient's potential litigation further down the line. I can remember when we were first looking at this 10, 15 years ago, that was a major sticking point for industry. How are you going to deal with the potential legal fallout of your software getting something wrong? As doctors, we deal with this fallout all the time because we're always worried about making a mistake. But can we now blame it on the software if something goes wrong?
The straightforward answer is no, I'm afraid not. Yeah, I mean, obviously the software is there to help learning, to help endoscopy and to support you. It's to help you detect, and it's to help you characterize, but in the end, you are the expert, and it does rely on your expertise. So although it's there to help increase detection, and it's to help increase improving characterization, it then does come back on your expertise, and you're the people who will then have to diagnose and make decisions on the necessary therapy, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, and I think I'd just add to it by I suppose using the analogy with driverless cars. This always crops up, doesn't it? I mean, with driverless cars, it's hard to see we'll move to a place rapidly, even when driverless cars become more widely used, where the individual in the car has no accountability for what happens. So I think the answer is we don't really know, but I think our view right now is, as David said, is no, in short. I also think, I mentioned it in my presentation, but I think understanding how the algorithm works and how it's trained and what it's telling you is going to be a key part of it. I still think there's a big part for training with AI. It's hard to imagine if we use optical diagnosis and something that we discussed before, resect and discard as an example. It's tempting to sort of say, or in theory, you could say, well, given the accuracy of the system, if you feel the evidence is there, can you move very quickly to a place where you are just making decisions based on what the AI tells you, and therefore you do not need to send samples to be analysed in a lab? Maybe, but I don't think we'll move to that state just from state A to state B without a process and about a validation. So I do think training is still going to be important. I can't see that it will be as simple as just you use AI and you no longer need to think. So I think there's a part for industry to play with training and thinking about how do we validate and train in a way that allows people to go on a bit of a journey with it, if you excuse the cliche. But ultimately, I would agree with David that it will still be, as the status quo now, dealing with the situation where you guys are still accountable for those decisions.
Somebody used the analogy of a GPS, your car GPS, and these units are obviously at the moment being sold separately, but so were GPS units, the TomToms and the Garmins of the world a few years ago. Now you wouldn't dream of buying a car without your GPS. Perhaps in a couple of years we'll be buying our systems with these already integrated. But I remember in 2010 when I was doing a PhD at UCL, and probably every couple of weeks somebody would drive up the Tottenham Court Road the wrong way because their GPS told them that it was okay to do it. Not very often, but it happened. But those guys it was the human at fault. It wasn't. We couldn't blame the machine then. I don't think we can blame the machine.
I'm just wondering about the legal precedent, though. I mean, for instance, with driverless cars, that's a good example. There have been instances where driverless cars have crashed and people have been injured or possibly killed. I'm not sure of the detail. But in that situation, what is the legal position? And what's happened legally in those situations? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question. I did see the one, I don't know whether you saw it just a couple of days ago, where I think it was a Tesla, and it crashed. It crashed on a barrier, which the Tesla wasn't designed to notice. It was supposed to notice other moving things around it. And the driver was playing a video game on his phone at the time and didn't notice that the car had gone off the road and hit the barrier. And I suspect that driver is in serious trouble rather than the car.
But are you going to make us sign a big disclaimer saying that we're responsible once we start using this? There's a lot of detail to this which isn't immediately apparent.
I've seen the Medtronic disclaimer.
Yeah.
You guys have it. You all have disclaimers.
Yeah, I think they're all the same. I mean, it's part of the regulatory piece when we're all designing these products that we have to do this, and therefore it is ultimately your decision. I guess the debate becomes when you make a decision that's at odds with the system, and then how you record that into your patient documentation and your patient workflow, because it could influence your decision. Perhaps you're not an expert and you're relying more on it, and it's influencing your decision, and you go with the decision that the system says, but you say it's your decision. There's an ethical and moral debate there, and I don't think this will continue to go on for some time. But purely from and guys, I don't know whether you agree with me, but from a regulatory point of view, we're not actually allowed to say that you can take our diagnosis as a given. It's really down to you, and it always has that disclaimer within our IFUs as well, which you'll probably see.
I'll just make a comment to Brian. In your career, many times you've removed a classic adenoma with great confidence, and the pathology report comes back and says there's a small carcinoma there. And at subsequent discussion, another pathologist said, actually, no, it's not a carcinoma, it's epithelial misplacement. I would say to you, how did you handle that? Because I think all we have here is just another modality that meets the same regulatory framework and requirements, and we make clinical, and in the clinical scenario I gave, no one was negligent.
No, I take that. I mean, these things, as they are currently, are simply tools that we use and we interpret, and ultimately it is our responsibility. But there will come a point at which it becomes almost automated, and at that point it becomes quite grey as to the responsibility.
I think a follow-up session might be good on the pathologists and the role of AI in their jobs.
Yeah.
Because particularly in the esophagus, with Barrett's esophagus and this disconcordance among them, that's a big area of improvement to come.
Once I've recovered from organising this one, we'll have another meeting. Thank you very much. John Anderson.
Yeah, Boo, can I congratulate you on a very interesting and thought-provoking meeting? Congratulations to the speakers. I'm going to address Jonathan, who I thought your talk was fascinating, Jonathan. I'd like you to just think in the future. So you showed us a whole plethora of different IT systems. And the theme of the morning, I take from the morning, is you're going to need partnership and integration for this thing to work. And we worked in the NHS, and it was just, I shouldn't be staggering, but it was, how many systems we've got which are not actually integrated. And I guess from a very basic level, programming level, underneath this is code. And are we moving to where there's going to be a better universal code, or do you think there's always going to be divergence of code writing, which will not allow the systems to actually be integrated? Because in the future, you like to think, if this is integrated with our software system and our reporting system, all those codes that you were mentioning would just be automatically generated from that software. I know it's a step on, but it's where we should be driving to. Can you see a point where we're going to reach that?
That was the whole point of my talk, John. We must move to that point. We waste a huge amount of time changing real-world scenarios into codes, a code for billing, a code for bed occupancy, a code for this, a code for the pathologist. And that's because what's really in our mind is so complicated, we need our mind to create a code to put in the database. But we have evolving information systems, just listening to us talk, looking at the way we scribble, of making that whole transition from a real-world scenario to what is the diagnosis, what is the prognosis, what is the treatment. We must invest significantly. We have the technology, and I do hope, unfortunately, when I'm long gone as opposed to part gone, we will be able to enjoy working with our patients again, communicate with our patients, do what a robot can't do, which is talk to them and have the appropriate documentation taking place in a far easier way. So that is, I'm sure we'll get there, but that is what we must invest in.
So I come back to you here to stick there, but we've got organizations which have got documents. We've got regulation documents. We're addressing the things that Brian was saying about legal documents. How have we got a strategic document which is going to push us in that direction? Because at the moment, we're all going off in different directions here. And whilst you are right in what you say, how do we make that happen? As Boo said, we are leading the thing here. So from GI, we have an opportunity we're right at the early stages here to drive it in that direction if it's feasible. And we need people like yourself within your role to drive this forward. Do you have the tools? What support do you need? How can we, because everyone in the room's looking at it thinking, yeah, that's us.
So I think these things only take place in steps. The next step is to get radiology reports and histology reports understood and integrated with our endoscopy reports so that we can phenotype everybody in our county with inflammatory bowel disease or all their polyps and know what the surveillance is going to be without going through all these different databases and all this human thought. It is not difficult to currently write an algorithm which does what you do in the outpatient clinic. It looks at the radiology, it looks at the histology, builds up an image, this is what's wrong with the patient, looks at the drugs. We can see what medications be wrong. And it'll be a thing of the past, entering into a registry, a disease registry. We are almost there. We are on the first stage of that ladder currently.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is that allowed or not? Or is that
Well, we've got because we've got just two more people in the audience who would like to say and Siwan, are you next?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Fantastic and thought-provoking conference. You can see lots of senior colleagues here. So my question is to industry. There are clearly lots of advantages that we can see, and I've got some experience of one of the systems, and I'm sure there will be advantages. Are you prospectively looking at the potential disadvantages? We've talked about the medical legal thing. Going back to what Dr. Inkster was talking about this morning and the interaction between these machines and us as humans, I'm particularly interested in training. So, for example, will this slow things down? Will it make less experienced people spend too long with all the false positives, looking at pathology that isn't really pathology? What are the disadvantages and how are you addressing that?
You're absolutely right. The risk is there. Of course, the more that you introduce new technologies, the more that there are risks of downsides as well as there being upsides. And again, it sounds like I'm just bouncing the question back each time, but it's in your hands, it's in your power, because I think these technologies can be provided to support you and to enable you. But if you do use a sat-nav to drive the wrong way up Tottenham Court Road and then stop in the middle of the road because you can't work out what to do, even though it's obvious everybody's going the other way, then it is going to confuse matters. But you're the experts. You are able to decide what to do and where to use these devices, where they enable you and where they don't. So I've got confidence that the products can be used by you really well.
It's a really serious point, actually, in this. Lawrence is in the audience, Lawrence Lovett. We had this discussion at his meeting as well. I think it's something, as Becky said this morning, the best way to predict the future is to create it, and I think we probably have to grapple with that. I don't think we have any answers right now, but we have to create the answers, I think, and I'm looking for you to do it. Last word, John Morris.
Like the others, I'm slightly blown away by what I'm seeing now, having been in gastroenterology for quite some time. But it struck me that all of these products seem remarkably similar for global corporations to all have the same idea at the same time. And with the brains and the finances that you have, when will we see truly disruptive technology? I think history will judge us by the fact that we spent a lot of the last 50 years putting big, long, black telescopes inside the human body. And I wonder if you could comment about when we might truly see disruptive technology.
I guess we are all going through a similar process, John. I think we're all working closely with clinicians to move forward in a way that you want to move forward. And as we're bringing products to market, we're testing them with key opinion leaders, and they're giving us feedback on them. So I guess it's no surprise that there will be similarities. I hope there are differences as well. Obviously, from my company, I believe we have some differences and advantages, but I know you guys will say exactly the same as well. I think it's just a matter of the way that we can evolve the technologies in line with your requirements. And if your requirements are quite homogenous, then the products may be. But if there are differences, we would love to be able to differentiate. But let's follow that journey together over time.
I mean, this is something that we've, internally we discussed is where's the, if you look at it in a commercial point of view, where's the differentiation going to be in AI? And is it going to be about having a better algorithm? Is it going to be about the quality and the quantity of the data that was used to, for deep learning? Possibly. I think there is a risk. I mean, I shouldn't say this at an AI conference. I think it's a positive thing. And I'll quote someone in doing this. I was listening to a podcast on AI. It's not something I do in my spare time normally, but because I was going to be talking here. And there's a guy called Jim Keller who was involved with development of the microprocessor for Intel and autonomous vehicles. And he quoted and said, quite often progress disappoints. And what he means by that is it's kind of the point I was making earlier on, is that I think there's a strong chance that even though we believe that, or I certainly believe that we believe the technology is disruptive, it will feel, it will become part of what we do, and it will not feel massively disruptive. But when you look back, you realise that this is so part of the fabric of what we do that it is potentially, or it could be perceived as such. I also think it comes back really to the point around understanding what the technology is doing and how it's being used in order to get the most out of it. And the final thing I'd say on that is, I guess for it to see that seismic shift in terms of truly disruptive around the game changing completely, it probably depends on how AI is paired with other things. I mean, if you look at cars were cars, and they didn't have AI until AI existed, and suddenly it changes the way we use cars. So, for example, if you're still using scopes to scope patients and doing that manually, and you're relying on sort of visual inspection, then AI will really help with that, but it's not going to change the game in which you play the field in which you play the game. If, on the other hand, you're using nanobots and everything's done via a capsule, just as an example. That's not in development as far as I'm aware, by the way, but you can see how that might change. So, I mean, it's a long-winded way of saying we don't know, but I think if you're looking for the way in which you operate is going to change significantly, it's probably going to be how other adjacent technologies are used in combination with AI would be my feeling.
Yeah, I think it's just a member of the band. It's not going to be the solo singer in this equation. The big thing, I think, is it's what the Olympus group has talked about with colorectal screening is how do you get technologies using artificial intelligence on a much wider basis and quality access to patients on a much larger scale. And I think we've seen recent discussions around infection, disinfection, and things like this. I think we think that it may be ripe for total disruption right now, but you won't see it happen as a step change, particularly in medicine. It's going to take incremental steps, and this is one of those incremental steps. Artificial intelligence is a real fuzzy word that people like to throw around, but at the end of the day, it's going to be like everything else in endoscopy has been, incremental improvements, and we'll make missteps, learn from it, and move on, the way it's always been.
Thanks very much. I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much to our industry speakers. Thank you. Thanks. So